Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about Spencer Stuart's 2022 Annual U.S. Board Index. And joining me, as she usually does, to discuss the highlights is Julie Daum, who's the practice leader in North America for Spencer Stuart. Julie, welcome.
Thank you, TK.
So Spencer Stuart has been conducting this survey for approximately 37 years, and it looks at the S&P 500 and on some key issues that relate to the boardroom and composition and board compensation, etc. So I won't sort of tell the audience how long you've been associated with this survey, but there is a little history there.
Yes.
And I was going to ask, in this year's results, what have you seen in terms of board composition and director recruiting that has made an impression on you?
So thank you. Boards have made real breakthroughs in director appointments from underrepresented groups in the past couple of years. We're also seeing them cast a wider net to identify boardroom talent, and they are adding directors who bring not only diversity, but diversity of skills. And so the profile of the new director is changing. Our data, which is through April of this year, because this is a proxy analysis for the current year, shows that CEO experience isn't required. 37 years ago, 100% almost of people who joined boards were CEOs. And that has changed significantly. Corporate leadership skills are valued, but they don't have to become from the CEO's position. 74% of the new independent directors came from outside those ranks. So not CEOs, not chairs, vice chair, president, or CEO, COO, which is an increase from 59% just last year. A third of new independent directors are corporate executives, so they're division subsidiary presidents or functional leaders like the CHRO. We saw that new independent directors from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups are more likely to come in that category, so the division subsidiary leaders. Over half of the new independent directors are actively employed. There are a number of reasons for that, but I think one of them is that boards tend to have a lot of people who are retired, and they really are looking for people who are current and staying current in the markets that the company competes in. 1/3 of the new directors are first-time public board members. That is pretty consistent with other years. That's been going on for quite some time, and that boards are willing to look for people who don't have prior board experience. Almost 20% of the new directors are next gen. They're 50 years old or younger. And again, that's a trend that's been slowly happening, but that's a pretty big number. And this another big change is half of the new directors this year have experience working internationally. And by that, I don't mean like they have had responsibility for something overseas. They've actually lived overseas. And that's a big increase up from 34% last year and up significantly from 10 years ago.
So, Julie, 10 years ago, if we were to go back and look, the changes have been unbelievably significant, okay, in how all this has changed. And you mentioned that boards have made breakthroughs in director appointments from unrepresented groups in recent years. And I'm wondering if you can just share some of those specific insights and updates from last year's analysis. And if my memory serves me corrected, last year we did see some nice movement in women being on boards.
Women and underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities. So this year that push continued. 72%, which is exactly the same as it was last year, of the new independent directors are from underrepresented groups, including women, underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities, and also LGBTQ, if the board disclosed that. So it is surprising. It's a very high number, and it's the same as last year. And so now women represent 32% of all S&P 500 directors, and that's up from 17% a decade ago. So there has been significant change in that regard. We also looked at, what boards disclosed, what information they disclosed, and what on diversity, because unless they tell you, you can't necessarily tell who in the boardroom is diverse. Almost all S&P 500 boards disclosed their racial and ethnic composition this year. That's a big change. And half of all boards disclosed adopting some kind of Rooney rule to make sure that they included individuals from underrepresented groups in the candidate pool when recruiting directors.
Well, again, that I can remember 10 years ago when the gender issue would move like 0.5%,
Exactly.
at a time. And so the last 5 years, there has been significant movement.
Yeah. 10 years ago, it was 17% women. So it's
Yeah.
it's a big increase.
Yeah.
Not
All that.
enough, but it's an
Yeah.
increase.
Well, I want to make sure that we discuss the issue of board refreshment, or in some cases, I might say lack of refreshment. But are the current methods that boards are using to promote refreshment of their board working? And in your opinion, if not, why not?
So we talked about, how we've seen progress this year, but what does that I think the important thing is, what does that translate to? And it doesn't, change is slow. And the reason is that only 7% of the S&P 500 directors turn over in a given year. And that number has been consistent kind of for a long time. 7 or 8% of director seats turn. And as in previous years, we talk about this, and it's actually getting worse rather than getting better. Boards continue to be more likely to use mandatory retirement rather than term limits as a refreshment tool. So 7%, only 7% of the S&P 500 have term limits. And if you really dig into that, it ranges from 10 to 20 years, but 70% of those of the few that have term limits set it at 15 years or more. And I think there's a lot of people who would say that's a long time to be on a board. So the number of S&P 500 boards that have a mandatory retirement age for directors has declined modestly during the past 10 years. So 70% have an age requirement as their methodology for turnover. But over half of the boards that have an age limit have a mandatory retirement age of 75 or older, compared with about half last year and 22% a decade ago. It used to be 72 was the retirement age. Before that, it was 70, and now it's 75. And I think if you just think about that, we all age to 75 differently, and our currency is dependent on when we retired and if we've stayed current. And so if you think about what the world was like when somebody who's 75 was the CEO or CFO of a company, it's changed quite a bit, right? And so boards are conscious of the fact that they need to get current experience. And that's why you're seeing in the new director pool more new, current and younger people coming in. But also boards need another method to have turnover if they don't, if they have this 75 or no retirement age. So 98% of boards, all but 10 companies, report conducting some sort of annual performance evaluation. And about half do individual director evaluation. That's the same as last year, but up significantly from a decade ago. And so I think what boards are trying to do is put in a robust board assessment process that includes looking at individual directors, performance and contribution from their peers, and also using a board matrix. And I think every board has gone to doing some kind of matrix where they talk about these are the skills we need versus these are the skills we have. And boards are paying more attention to that. So they are also trying to make sure that people who had experience are staying current. So an easy example is if you retired out of the tech world 10 years ago and remain on this board, do you really check off the technology box in the matrix? Are you current in what's going on in technology? So I think boards are trying hard to look at relevance, look at contribution, and have a methodology to having conversations with directors who've been great contributors up to now, but may not have the right background going forward.
Well, I've always said in this show, after every year, the older I get, the further I push that mandatory retirement.
Couldn't agree
number,
more.
But the interesting thing that I just want to touch on a second and get your opinion is these evaluations. Because while everybody is doing evaluations, there is other research which we've seen, the PwC specifically,
Right.
were asked if directors should be replaced. And the number is, 50%. It's astronomically high.
Yes.
So that suggests to me, and probably suggests to investors, that people are not willing to have the difficult conversations, that there are people that should be replaced either by skill set or by some other category, whether it's younger, more different experience, underrepresented group, whatever it might be. And Julie, it's, the age requirement wouldn't be, and this is the argument, it's not necessary if somebody's doing good evaluations, but
Right.
are they having the difficult conversations?
And that's really the important question, because now everybody's doing them. But yet, when we look at the turnover numbers, just the statistics, we don't see people leaving the board before they hit the retirement age. So, they're within 1 or 2 years, or they've hit the retirement age or actually even gone over. So, it's hard to imagine that everybody, as I said, stays the same until they hit 75. So it's clear boards are not having those conversations, or we'd see more turnover, and we'd see more turnover before the 75th birthday. And we're not. And it's hard, I think everybody knows these are hard conversations to have, but very important. And the shareholders should pay attention.
Yep, it's a business. At some point in time,
Yeah.
board leadership has to enter in and make sure that it has the right people in the room. That seat is very valuable real estate for, helping a company get where it needs to get to. So yes, it has to be collegial, but in the end, it's a business and somebody has got to do it. So listen, Julie, we're probably out of time, but I wanted, we've only touched the surface, and the index report and the highlights have interesting information on, more on composition, on governance, and on director compensation, which we didn't even get a chance to talk about. So where can folks get a copy of this year's results and on the index?
So you can access the report and other reports, including we do a breakdown. So we do the whole S&P 500, but we also look at it by industry sector. And we have some audio interviews from directors offering their perspective on this. But all of that could be viewed, and many other things that information we publish on the Boardroom at spencerstewart.com/USBI.
US Board Index. Okay.
Yes.
Listen, I want to thank you, as usual, for taking the time to join us and covering this highlights. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, TK.
And that will conclude this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.